everybody, and welcome back to another JTech video. I didn't talk on the video, so narration. I'm just going to give a little overview. That's the transmission shift fingers, and that is actually how the shift collars move back and forth, which you see right here. It's the three smaller sets in between the bigger gears. And you turn the transmission with the input shaft, which is what we're going to be removing and reinstalling today. And there you have it. Well, the first thing we start off, obviously, is removing the cover.
Oh, you see there's a new coffee stand in Jacksonville? Double bean fucking whatever.
And to remove
Some
the cover,
bikini coffee
you might
stand.
have to give it a couple of solid but careful hits with a hammer to loosen it,
Getting business.
Fucking hose.
as you see here. Now the snap
They're
ring
drinking
is held
coffee
on
now.
by, or the input shaft is held on by multiple snap rings,
Nope, I'll stick with Monster.
and I don't have a closer view, but that's what I'm removing now. And it can be a bit tricky, so you have to be careful not to hurt yourself or any components. There's also a bearing that is press fit into there that the input shaft rides on. There's two methods to remove it. One is what you see here, which is
Why?
hit the input shaft carefully with a hammer and rock it back and forth to loosen and eventually pull out the input
I
shaft.
have to. I missed last week or 2 weeks ago. I fucked up my grade pretty good.
Once again, there is another snap ring holding the input shaft to a certain depth, not to hold it in, but to a certain depth, which you see me removing here. The other item to remove it is a specialty bearing puller, which I will be using in a minute. Now you want to be careful not to confuse a bearing puller with a bearing seat tool. They are different, and if misused like any tool, they will be damaged. Now see, this is the bearing puller tool I was talking about. If you look carefully, you can see the bolt at the end of it, and that is the biggest difference between them. The bearing seater does not have a bolt, it has a strike face. And the bearing puller has two components, which slide onto a lip that the bearing has, and a ring goes over to the two components and hold it there. Sorry for the weird focusing. And as you can see, once you use the bearing puller installed correctly, it's as simple as turning the bolt on the end, and the bearing should smoothly come right out.
Mario! Mario!
And there you have it. It's as simple as that if they're using the tools correctly. Now, one thing you are checking with this is, like with any bearing, you want to test it for any binding Make sure it has smooth rolling. And this one didn't. It did have a hitch in there, which would be a cause to replace the bearing. And as you can see, the input shaft is pretty wobbly right now, but it is held in with a smaller snap ring behind it. That one is a bit of a pain to get out. Not a lot of working room. Now, one reason you would replace the input shaft is the splines on the end are worn, and as you can see here, if it focuses, the teeth on the input shaft on this side are chipped and worn away. It also had a large amount of grooving and wear on the inside. And it is designed that way because it's a lot easier to replace one small component like that, and less expensive than replacing the whole transmission. And though it takes time, the installation of an input shaft is just the reverse of the removal. Obviously, you would use new components where indicated, like the snap rings and the bearings that the input shaft is riding on. Like I said, sometimes the removal and installation of the rings can be a pain. But you do want to be careful. Damaged components cost time and money. I forgot to mention this did have a small spacer that goes on behind the bearing. And as I put the snap ring on, that is what the depth the press fit bearing goes into. Some interruptions. But like I said, the bearing driver is different because it has a striking face. And when you use this, you want to make sure you hit it firmly and square. If you hit the driver